Today I'm going to talk about whether high schoolers should date. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. So I got the question, should high schoolers date? And I'm going to answer this with a very definitive maybe. It's a bit of a complicated subject, which is why I'm answering this in a video and not just in a comment. There are things that can be valuable about dating when you're in high school. And I mean, it's even technically speaking possible that you can find your future husband or future wife in high school. I actually knew a couple who started dating in high school and they kept dating through college and got married afterwards and had children. I mean, I lost touch with them, but to the last I saw a few years ago on Facebook, they were doing quite well. So it's not impossible. It's unlikely. It's very unlikely that you will find your future wife or future husband in high school, but it's not impossible. So there is that. It's, I think, a relatively small concern since it's so unlikely, but it's by no means impossible. The thing about dating in high school is okay, so like if you're very young, like if you're like 13 or 14, this is probably a waste of time. You're still, like, there's a lot of preparation you want to do to be an adult. There are a lot of things to learn. One of the reasons, by the way, is that when you are an adult, you have less time for things. Like you still have time to learn. Like, you know, adults still read books and learn new things and talk to people and learn so on. But you do have less time for it because more people need your time for things. And like if you become once you become a parent, if you're going to be a parent, if that's if that's your vocation and if that's what God is going to give you in your life, then you're going to have a lot less time for reading and so on. So like having done a lot of reading when you're younger, having done a lot of discussions, having learned a lot of things while you're younger is going to stand you in very good stead when you're older. So you don't want to waste your time while you're younger with things that can't benefit you to the exclusion of things that can. And so, if you're really young, I would say I would advise against dating when you're really young, just because like it's not a good use of your time. Like the odds of you doing anything very useful dating when you're like 13 or 14, 13 is a bit young for high school, but you can be 13 when you hit high school. That's very low, and I don't think that's going to be at all beneficial. Like there's no harm in essentially, like if you're talking about a very minor sort of thing, which essentially amounts to friends who, like have some romantic feelings to each other, but you're not doing anything, really romantic, you're just kind of, spending some time with each other before you two move on and like, okay, whatever. The thing is, the whole dating throughout high school, especially later on, where this is, you might get some useful practice in getting to know people and in finding out about people and learning about people and so on. Now you're going to face, okay, so dating is also going to be fairly painful. You're going to face rejection. You're probably going to get your heart broken because, you fall in love with somebody and odds are it's not great. Or odds are not good that this is the person you're going to marry. So you two will break up and that's going to be phenomenally painful. So there are a bunch of downsides to dating in high school. Another thing is it's really dangerous. That you're physically, by the time you're in high school for the most part, and by the time you're like in later high school, you're physically capable of making children. And so, but this is not a great time to do it. It's a difficult time to get married and to have the sort of community support for getting married that you should have at this point. So this is not the right time for most people. There'll be exceptions to everything I say, but for most people, like high school is not the right time to start having children. And so it can be very tempting to engage in those activities that will lead you to have children. And now I'm not trying to claim that every instance of copulation necessarily produces a child or anything, but this is just, there's so many things that can go wrong at this point if you have children, where you don't get the right support. There can be, temptations, for the mother to go and kill your child, to avoid raising it. And there are just a lot of things that can go really, really wrong where you don't have that sort of community support. You haven't built up the, strong ability to care for other people yet. You're still dependent yourself while you're in high school. I mean, most people are, I should say. So you want to be very careful to never put yourself in the circumstance where you're going to make bad decisions in the moment. So if you're going to date, and you need to also be realistic about the fact that you recently acquired a bunch of new instincts, because a 10-year-old does not have any instincts that help towards reproduction. 10-year-olds do not develop romantic attachments. They just don't have those feelings. So you spent most of your life not having these feelings, and only recently do you have these powerful instincts that started developing on you. And how to deal with all of these powerful instincts is still a very fresh and new thing. So you can't expect to be very good at it because you haven't practiced very much. And so, I mean, that's a much more, people often describe it as teenagers are stupid, which is wrong. But what they are is very inexperienced. Teenagers just don't have, you can't develop the habit of doing something well until you've had enough time to develop that habit. And things like resisting temptation and being the master of yourself and so on is something that takes time and practice, and it's really easy to get wrong. And so you need to be extremely careful about the circumstance, the situations that you put yourself into, because given that you're guaranteedly not going to be at the full strength of your virtue. Your self-mastery is by no means, unless God help you, you're really going downhill in life. Your self-mastery is not by any means fully developed at the most it will be. And so if you are going to date in high school, be very careful to keep it to things where you are not in temptation's way. You're not putting yourself in temptation's way, because you're not going to have this, you're not going to be at your strongest for resisting temptation. So, if you're going to do it, be very realistic about this. Things like always being around other people, like the places you go on dates being things where you're not alone, other than being alone for a minute or two is nothing, right? But in general, just don't put yourself in circumstances where you're going to be alone with another person, with privacy, for really extended periods of time. Having other people around, or generally, even if they're not immediately available, those sorts of things are just a really good idea to not put yourself in temptation's way. Related to that is you will want to, if you're dating in high school, be realistic about the fact that you're not married yet and probably won't be married soon. So you want to be very careful about the pace at which you are developing an emotional bond to a person, and that you don't let that, because that can develop inertia, or something analogous to inertia, I should say. And so as you're getting closer to somebody, that can take on its own life, where you're getting closer and closer and you want to spend time with them. And it can be, you can start spending so much time with a person that you start feeling like you're married to them. And I've seen this in a number of circumstances, a whole bunch of stuff. There's a fascinating video. This is certainly later than high school, but it illustrates the point really well, actually, where there's a guy who had a crush on a girl, and or a woman, I should say, and they moved, but he said he could, it was okay, he was over her. They moved in together as roommates, and yeah, obviously this is inadvisable. But the thing is, he basically started thinking of her as a wife. And what's really curious is it was phrased as if, and her interpretation was that he wanted to win her over to be his girlfriend. But if you looked into the particulars and the sorts of things he was doing for her, of doing these little things and helping her and supporting her in various ways, he wasn't trying to win her as a girlfriend. He already in his mind thought of her as a wife, and was doing the sorts of things that a husband would do for a wife. Because a husband and wife do various things, throughout the day and so on. They do various things for each other to support each other in various ways. And they're, relatively small and nothing Herculean or amazing, but somebody just they're really busy at the and you just make them a meal. Or, they're can't get to something right now and you clean something for them. And this is a thing husbands and wives do for each other. or these are things that husbands and wives, just occasionally comes up, you do things and like not a big deal. And he was doing this sort of stuff for her. And like, this is not the way to get a girlfriend. This was like him basically like in his mind, he confused her with already having a wife because he's living with her. And they had separate bedrooms from what I understand of the story. This is a YouTube video I'm talking about. But in his mind, like he's living with this woman. And so like there are all the daily things that come up of living with a woman, that is like what living with a wife would be like. And so in his mind, like his feelings sort of morphed into this and he just started treating her as a wife. And then, I mean, it fell apart horribly because she wasn't interested in him romantically, which was already made clear. So it really fell apart. And the thing that is related to what I'm saying about like if you're dating in high school is you need to be careful too, given that odds are extremely good you're not going to be marrying each other anytime soon. And like, like if it works out, like if your families are supportive and you two, like you're properly compatible in the same faith and have the same ideas of virtue and so on, and like you're convinced that you and the other person like will do a good job together of eventually like marrying and being parents, and and you both have that real understanding of what marriage is, that marriage isn't like a fun party. Marriage is two people working together to make new people and then give to them. And then it's going to be difficult and hard, but very, very worthwhile because fundamentally it's an act of generosity. If you two understand this and, using the old metaphor of like, we're going to pull on the same plow together, that we're going to be teamed up like two oxen pulling a plow, and like I would like to be harnessed together with you as we do this difficult labor together. Like if that really is your understanding, then you could get engaged in high school, and that can and at which point like it would make sense to like become emotionally tied to each other in the way that two people who will be husband and wife should. But it's unlikely that's going to happen, and it's very likely that you and another person who are dating will have some good times, have some bad times, split up, and you want to be really careful that you're not proceeding further in your imagination than is actually happening. You don't want to treat this as a betrothal without being betrothed. You do not want to treat this as an engagement without being engaged. And so you need to always maintain that distance, that there is a buffer between you. There is a barrier between you that you two can't get closer to each other then, because that closer isn't really on the table at the moment. You're not going to get engaged to each other, so you can't get closer than not engaged to each other. And it's really, really easy to screw up and let yourself indulge in like, okay, I found the person and we're together, we're going to be together forever, and let yourself think of this as being engaged to the other person. And then you're going to screw up. You're going to cause problems. You're going to ask more of the other person than probably they would be right to give, actually. And although there's a good chance you also blame them for it at the time. And, inexperience. And it's also the case that you will probably get very hurt when you split up as a result. Whereas if you keep a proper understanding, if you understand that distance, that you can't get closer then because you're not engaged yet, that the mere fact that you're together, that you're going out, that you regularly do fun things together, that you regularly spend time in each other's company, does not mean that you are engaged or that you're husband and wife. And to mentally keep that separate, to keep that space, that emotional space between you intact, like what it should be given what you are to each other, which is not husband and wife, which is not engaged, you will do much, much better. You won't ask things of the person that they should not give. You will not give things if you're asked that you shouldn't give. And it will not be as horrifically painful when the two of you do split up, as you probably will, statistically speaking, in high school, if you have maintained in your mind the space that is there in reality. So that's probably one of the biggest things. And part of that is like, don't neglect your friends, because remember, this is like a girlfriend, a girlfriend who, you're not coming to engagement with anytime soon is a friend who's a girl. And yeah, you're romantically interested in each other, but the reality is you're not getting closer than a certain distance for a long time, if ever, and probably not. And so you need to make sure that you don't neglect the other aspects of your life for this relationship, because that kind of relationship does not justify neglecting other aspects of your life. Now, I mean, even when you're married, you need friends. You will be doing yourself, your friends, and your spouse a disservice if you don't have friends when you're married. If you neglect all your friends and have no relationships, and the only person in your life is your spouse and your children, you're going to have a really, really, really hard time being good to them. It's going to be much, much easier if you maintain friendships. So you should always maintain friendships. And it's a very easy thing because high schoolers have so little experience. It's very easy to neglect friends when you fall in love with somebody. And so, be really careful to not do that, and don't neglect your studies, and don't neglect your extracurricular studies, which are often your more important ones of, reading and reading philosophy and reading, reading good literature and reading things that help you to understand more about humanity and the world around you and about God and so on. Don't neglect those things. It's very easy to, and it's all the more easy to do this if you accidentally let yourself think of yourself as being married or getting married when you're not. So that's probably one of the biggest things. It does relate to being cautious, only dating around other people. And okay, you take a car ride to someplace that has other people, and then you take a car ride to drop the person back off at their home. That's the temptation there. Yeah, I mean, yeah, technically speaking, people could go wrong, but I think most people aren't going to be overly tempted to do something, to go drive together to someplace entirely different, motel that rents by the hour. That's a pretty big deal. That's pretty different. That's not something you do in the moment. That's you have to consciously choose to drive someplace else sort of thing. I mean, even even being in a car, yeah, you could go into the back seat, but you have to consciously choose to be in a different seat. You have to, that's not a thing you can slip into nearly as easily. So as long as you park in well-lit areas and stuff, that's not too big a deal. That's not putting yourself very much in the way of temptation, at least for most people. Know yourself. If that is, then don't do it. For most people, I think that's not putting themselves in the way of very much temptation, because there's still a pretty good wall between what you're actually doing intentionally and anything you can slip into. But in general, the thing is that sort of thing, where you're only, maybe you're in the car together when you drive someplace, but then you get to a place that has a bunch of people, at it. So you're only together around other people is going to help you to keep that emotional distance, where it is easier to not, sort of in your imagination progress too far and think you're someplace where you're not. So, yeah, in summary, don't neglect any, don't put yourself in the way of temptation to do anything that you should not do, that is to be immoral in any way. Don't neglect the fact that you are still developing into an adult, and especially intellectually, and so you need to spend a lot of time doing that in terms of things studying and learning and reading and exposing yourself to stuff and developing your friendships with people who can teach you things, and who are good to be around and so on. And don't take mental shortcuts in don't imagine yourself to be in places that you are not. And yeah, it can be done well. If you do those things, you can date well in high school. It's by no means necessary. You're not missing out on the fullness of being human or anything if you're not dating in high school. You're not condemning yourself to never, to never being able to find a person if you just don't date in high school. You are never finding a spouse. I mean, if it is your vocation, because the other thing too is bear in mind your vocation could be to the priesthood, or your vocation could be to a religious life, or your vocation could be to the committed single life, or what have you. And so your vocation may well not be to to be a father or mother, husband or wife. And so, and when you're first getting your that initial flush of instincts that puberty gives to you, it's going to be really, really, really easy to think like, oh, definitely I'm supposed to be a parent. And maybe you are, statistically, you probably are, but you're an individual, you're not a statistic, and so like you have no way of knowing. And it's really easy to be misled there. So like, also be realistic about this. Like your instincts are not the voice of God. So like, be realistic about that too. And yeah, and then the final thing is kind of like, don't be desperate about it. Like, it's not the end of the world if you don't date in high school. Like, there's fun you'll miss out on. There's also a lot of pain you'll miss out on. And there's a lot of very important, useful stuff to being a happy and good adult that you can miss out on if you spend too much time dating. And it's not exclusive. I don't mean that like, if you date that like you'll miss out on everything, obviously. Like you can do it well. It's also really easy to do it badly. Can be good. Can easily be bad. It's one of those things that like can have benefits, can be very dangerous. Approach with caution. If you know what you're doing, you can do it well. And never stop being careful. And, guard your virtue very carefully. And, be really careful because even when you're doing it well, you're playing with fire. Yeah. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.